Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching the stars drift past the view screen. The year was 2387, and humanity had been exploring space for over 200 years, but they kept a strict rule about not bothering other civilizations that were not ready for contact. Jake was a tall man with gray hair and steady eyes who had commanded ships for 15 years. His crew trusted him completely. Navigator Lisa Parker called out from her station that they were approaching the Kepler 442 system. She was a young woman with dark hair who could plot courses through space better than anyone Jake had ever seen. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez worked at his console, making sure all the ship systems ran perfectly. Communications Officer Amy Taylor monitored radio signals from across the galaxy, looking for signs of intelligent life. The Liberty was an exploration ship built for long missions in deep space. It had powerful engines that could travel faster than light and stealth technology that made it invisible to most sensors. The ship carried no weapons because humanity believed in peaceful exploration. They would rather hide than fight. As they entered the system, Jake ordered Lisa to take them to a safe distance from the fourth planet. Their sensors had detected advanced technology and possible cities on the surface. Danny reported that the stealth systems were working perfectly and no one would be able to see them. Amy picked up radio transmissions that sounded like organized communications between different locations. Through their telescopes, they could see the planet clearly. It had blue oceans and green continents with large cities that sparkled in the sunlight. Ships moved between the cities and strange aircraft flew through the atmosphere. Jake knew they had found an advanced alien civilization. Amy worked to decode the alien language, while Danny scanned the planet with passive sensors that would not give away their position. After several hours, Amy announced that she was starting to understand some of the transmissions. The aliens called themselves Zephyrians, and they seemed to have a military government led by commanders and admirals. Lisa used the ship computers to analyze Zephyrian technology. Their ships used fusion engines and energy weapons, but they were at least 50 years behind human technology. The Zephyrians had achieved faster than light travel, but their ships were slower and less efficient than human vessels. Over the next few days, the crew of the Liberty learned more about Zephyrian society. They were blue-skinned humanoids with large eyes who could communicate through telepathy as well as speech. They lived in vast cities and had colonized several worlds in nearby systems. Most importantly, they considered themselves the most advanced race in the galaxy. Amy made an interesting discovery while listening to Zephyrian cultural broadcasts. The aliens had ancient stories about mythical beings called Terrans, who supposedly lived among the stars long ago. These legends spoke of ghost ships that could appear and disappear without warning, and warriors who fought with incredible skill and violence. The stories described Terrans as pale-skinned creatures with small eyes who came from a world of endless war. According to the myths, these beings had ships that could destroy entire fleets and weapons that turned matter into energy. Most Zephyrians thought these were just old stories told to frighten children. Jake realized that these myths might be based on real encounters with early human explorers from centuries ago. In the early days of space travel, some human ships had made contact with primitive aliens before the non-interference rules were established. Those contacts had been brief, and the humans had always left quickly, but apparently they had made quite an impression. Danny found evidence that supported this theory when he detected trace radiation signatures that matched old human ship designs. The readings were very faint and hundreds of years old, but they proved that human ships had been in this system before. Jake wondered what those early explorers had done to create such frightening legends. Amy continued monitoring Zephyrian communications and discovered something that made Jake very worried. The Zephyrians were planning a major military operation against a group of peaceful aliens called the Centauri. The transmissions spoke of invasion fleets and conquest, and total victory over inferior species. The Centauri lived on worlds in a nearby system, and from what Amy could determine, they were a gentle people who had never developed weapons or military technology. They spent their time creating art and music and studying the universe around them. They would be helpless against a Zephyrian invasion. Jake called his senior officers together in the briefing room to discuss what they had learned. Lisa brought up star charts showing the positions of both Zephyrian and Centauri worlds. Danny showed them scans of Zephyrian warships that were gathering at military bases. Amy played recordings of Zephyrian commanders discussing their invasion plans. The Zephyrians had over 200 warships ready to attack the Centauri colonies. Their plan was simple and brutal. They would destroy any resistance and enslave the survivors to work in their mines and factories. The Zephyrian supreme commander was a being called Veltar, who believed that stronger races had the right to dominate weaker ones. Jake felt sick as he listened to the invasion plans, the prime directive forbade humans from interfering with alien civilizations. But how could they stand by and watch genocide happen? Amy had translated messages from Centauri worlds that showed they were completely unaware of the coming attack. They would be caught totally by surprise. Danny asked if they should return to Earth and report what they had found. The journey would take several weeks, and by then the invasion would be over, and millions of Centauri would be dead or enslaved. Lisa suggested they could try to warn the Centauri, but that would reveal the existence of humans and break the prime directive. Jake stared at the star charts for a long time, thinking about their options. The Liberty was just one ship with no weapons facing an entire alien empire. But somewhere out there, peaceful beings were about to die, and humanity might be the only force that could save them. He thought about the old myths that called humans Terrans and described them as legendary warriors. Maybe it was time for those legends to become real again. Jake made his decision and ordered Amy to send a coded message to Earth requesting immediate instructions. He also told Danny to begin monitoring Zephyrian fleet movements. If humanity was going to act, they needed to know exactly what they were facing. As the Liberty continued its silent watch, Jake wondered if the galaxy was about to rediscover why humans should never be forgotten. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster led a small team in a stealth shuttle toward the main Zephyrian military base. Ryan was the experienced scout who had spent years gathering intelligence on alien civilizations. His team included Sergeant Linda Hayes, who was an expert at electronic surveillance, and Corporal Ben Clark, who could hack into almost any computer system. The shuttle used advanced cloaking technology to remain invisible as it approached the Zephyrian fleet. Through their sensors, they could see hundreds of warships docked at massive space stations. The ships were dark gray with swept-back wings and looked designed for one purpose, which was destroying other vessels. Linda scanned the Zephyrian communications networks and discovered that the invasion fleet was even larger than they had thought. Over 300 ships were preparing to attack the Centauri worlds, and they carried enough firepower to glass entire planets. Ben managed to access their tactical databases and found detailed invasion plans. The Zephyrians had been planning this attack for months. They had studied Centauri society and knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Their plan was to destroy the main cities first, then hunt down any survivors who tried to hide. They expected the entire campaign to last less than a week. Ryan felt his stomach turn as he read the intelligence reports. The Zephyrians had already conquered and enslaved the populations of 3 other star systems. They had a massive empire built on the suffering of weaker races. The peaceful Centauri would just be their latest victims. Back on Earth, Admiral Kate Sullivan sat in her office at Terran Federation headquarters, reading Captain Morrison's urgent report. Kate was a veteran commander who had served in the space fleet for 30 years. She had gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. The report from the Liberty made her very worried. Kate called an emergency meeting with President Marcus Webb and the Federation Council. Marcus was a calm man in his 50s who had led humanity through several diplomatic crises. The council members were representatives from all the major human colonies, and they took the Prime Directive very seriously. The debate in the council chamber was intense. Some members argued that humanity could not interfere with alien affairs, no matter what was happening. Others believed that preventing genocide was more important than following rules. President Webb listened to all the arguments before making his decision. Marcus authorized Operation Silent Thunder, which would allow human forces to protect the Centauri without revealing humanity's existence to the galaxy. The operation would be completely covert, and if anyone asked, the humans would deny any involvement. Kate was given command of a small task force that would try to stop the invasion. Meanwhile, back in the Kepler system, Dr. Helen Carter was studying the ancient Zephyrian text that Amy had translated. Helen was a xenobiologist who specialized in alien cultures and languages. She had noticed something very interesting in the old stories about the mythical Terrans. The legends were much more detailed than simple myths usually were. They described human technology with surprising accuracy, including fusion reactors and plasma weapons and faster-than-light drives. They even mentioned specific battle tactics that human military forces still use today. Helen realized that these stories were not just random folklore, but actual historical records of encounters with human military units. Centuries ago, when humans first started exploring space, they had not yet developed the Prime Directive. Some early expeditions had included warships that were ready to fight if necessary. The ancient Zephyrians had met these human warriors and been so impressed by their fighting ability that they turned the encounters into legends. The stories spoke of ships that could destroy entire fleets and soldiers who fought like demons. No wonder the modern Zephyrians thought they were just myths. Supreme Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his flagship reviewing the final invasion plans. Veltar was a tall Zephyrian with dark blue skin and silver eyes who had never lost a battle. He commanded the most powerful fleet in Zephyrian history and expected the conquest of the Centauri to be easy. His second in command was Lieutenant Kezara, who was younger but very intelligent. She'd been reading the old stories about Terrans and was starting to worry about them. Kezara suggested that they should be careful in case the legends had some truth to them, but Veltar just laughed. Veltar told Kezara that if Terrans had ever really existed, they were obviously extinct now, since no one had seen them for hundreds of years. The galaxy belonged to the Zephyrians, and no mythical warriors were going to stop them from taking what they wanted. The Zephyrian fleet began moving toward Centauri space, in a formation that stretched across millions of kilometers. Their ships had powerful shields and energy weapons that could destroy cities. Veltar was confident that nothing could stand against such a force. Captain Morrison received new orders from Admiral Sullivan telling him to begin covert operations against the Zephyrian fleet. 2 more ships would join the Liberty, including the USS Ranger commanded by Steve Martin and the USS Falcon under Captain Beth Collins. It would still be only 3 human ships against hundreds of alien vessels. Steve Martin was an experienced captain who had commanded stealth ships for over 10 years. His ship, the Ranger, was built for hit-and-run attacks and could strike targets without being detected. Captain Beth Collins was one of the youngest ship commanders in the fleet, but she was also one of the most skilled at tactical combat. The 3 human ships used their superior stealth technology to shadow the Zephyrian fleet as it moved toward Centauri space. They stayed far enough away to avoid detection, but close enough to monitor enemy communications and movements. Danny Rodriguez worked with the other chief engineers to coordinate their sensor networks. Amy Taylor and her counterparts on the other ships listened to Zephyrian transmissions and discovered that the aliens were completely confident of victory. They were already planning how to divide up Centauri territory and which planets would be used for slave labor. The casual way they discussed mass murder made the human crews angry. Jake Morrison knew that his small force was badly outnumbered, but human ships had advantages that the Zephyrians did not know about. Their stealth systems were generations ahead of anything the aliens possessed, and their weapons were more accurate and powerful. If they were smart and careful, they might be able to make a difference. The Liberty and her sister ships prepared for the most difficult mission in human history. They would have to fight an entire alien empire while remaining invisible and protecting innocent people who did not even know they existed. Jake wondered if 3 ships could really change the outcome of an interstellar war. As the fleets moved through space toward their final confrontation, Jake remembered the ancient Zephyrian legends about Terran warriors. Maybe it was time for those old stories to become reality again. The massive Zephyrian invasion fleet moved through space like a dark cloud of death. Over 300 warships traveled in formation toward the peaceful Centauri worlds. Supreme Commander Veltar stood on his flagship bridge watching the stars and thinking about the easy victory that awaited him. Captain Jake Morrison observed the alien fleet from the bridge of the USS Liberty. His ship and the 2 others were completely invisible to Zephyrian sensors, thanks to their advanced stealth technology. Danny Rodriguez monitored their position to make sure they stayed hidden while Amy Taylor listened to enemy communications. The USS Ranger, under commander Steve Martin, took position on the fleet's left flank, while Captain Beth Collins moved the USS Falcon to the right side. The three human ships were like sharks swimming unseen around a school of fish. They were badly outnumbered, but they had surprise. On their side, Jake knew they could not attack the main fleet directly because there were too many enemy ships. Instead, they would have to use hit-and-run tactics to slowly weaken the Zephyrians before they reached Centauri space. Every ship they destroyed would be one less weapon pointed at innocent civilians. The first attack came without warning. The Ranger decloaked behind a Zephyrian destroyer that was flying at the edge of the formation. Steve Martin fired 2 plasma torpedoes that punched through the alien ship's shields and tore it apart. Before the other Zephyrians could react, the Ranger had cloaked again and disappeared. Veltar received the report that one of his ships had been destroyed, but his sensors showed no enemy vessels in the area. The destroyer had simply exploded without any apparent cause. His tactical officers were confused because their instruments had detected no incoming weapons or hostile contacts. Lieutenant Kazara suggested that they should investigate the attack more carefully, but Veltar dismissed it as some kind of accident. Perhaps the destroyer had suffered a reactor malfunction or been hit by a meteor. He ordered the fleet to continue toward its target and maintain formation. 2 hours later, the Falcon struck at a Zephyrian cruiser that was scouting ahead of the main force. Captain Collins used her ship's superior speed to get close without being detected, then fired a full spread of quantum torpedoes. The cruiser broke apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up space for thousands of kilometers. This time, Veltar knew they were under attack, but he still could not see the enemy. His sensors showed nothing but empty space where the explosions had occurred. The mysterious attackers appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. It was like fighting ghosts. Kazara pulled up the ancient texts on her personal computer and read them again. The old stories spoke of Terran ships that could become invisible and strike without warning. They described weapons that could destroy, vessels in a single hit, and warriors who fought like spirits of vengeance. Jake Morrison coordinated the attacks from the Liberty while staying hidden in the sensor shadow of a large asteroid. His ship had the most advanced computers and could track all 300 enemy vessels at once. He assigned targets to the Ranger and Falcon based on which ships were most isolated and vulnerable. The human ships struck again and again over the next several hours. They destroyed escort vessels and supply ships and communication relays that were separated from the main formation. Each attack was perfectly planned and executed before the Zephyrians could respond. Danny Rodriguez had modified their torpedo guidance systems to be completely silent until the moment of impact. The weapons used no active sensors that might give away their position. Instead, they relied on passive tracking and computer calculations to find their targets. The Zephyrian fleet began to show signs of panic as more ships disappeared. Veltar ordered his vessels to close formation and increase their sensor sweeps, but they still could not detect the attackers. The mysterious enemy seemed to know exactly when and where to strike for maximum effect. Amy Taylor intercepted communications between Zephyrian ships and heard the growing fear in their voices. The alien crews were talking about ghost ships and invisible demons that could kill them without warning. Some of the younger officers were starting to believe the old legends about Terrans. Steve Martin brought the Ranger in close to a Zephyrian battleship and fired a spread of armor-piercing torpedoes at its engine section. The massive alien vessel lost power and began to drift helplessly. Before it could send a distress signal, the Ranger hit it again, and the battleship exploded in a spectacular fireball. Captain Collins used the Falcon's advanced sensors to locate the command frequencies that Zephyrian ships used to communicate with each other. She targeted the relay satellites that carried these signals and destroyed them with precision strikes. Without communications, the alien fleet became confused and disorganized. Veltar was becoming desperate as his fleet suffered loss after loss. Nearly 20 ships had been destroyed, and he still had no idea what was attacking them. His officers were starting to question his leadership, and some were openly talking about the ancient Terran legends. Kazara approached Veltar on the bridge and showed him passages from the old texts that described exactly what was happening to their fleet. Ships destroyed by invisible enemies, weapons that struck without warning, warriors who fought like ghosts in the darkness between stars. Veltar read the ancient words and felt a chill run down his spine. The descriptions matched their current situation perfectly, but he refused to believe that mythical beings from old stories could be real. There had to be a logical explanation for what was happening. The attacks continued as the fleet approached Centauri space. Jake Morrison ordered his ships to focus on the Zephyrian supply vessels that carried fuel and ammunition for the invasion force. Without these resources, the alien fleet would not be able to sustain a long campaign. Danny Rodriguez developed new tactics for each attack to keep the enemy guessing. Sometimes they used long-range missiles fired from maximum distance. Other times they got in close and used their plasma cannons for devastating point-blank strikes. The Zephyrians never knew what to expect. The Liberty struck at a formation of Zephyrian troop transports that were carrying soldiers for the ground invasion. Jake knew that destroying these ships would save Centauri lives, even if it meant revealing their presence. The transports exploded one after another as human torpedoes found their targets. As the battered Zephyrian fleet finally reached the edge of Centauri space, Veltar had lost over 50 ships to the mysterious attackers. His remaining vessels were low on fuel and ammunition, and his crews were demoralized and frightened. The easy conquest he had planned was turning into a nightmare. The peaceful Centauri worlds lay ahead, completely unaware of the approaching danger. Their cities sparkled in the light of their sun, and their ships moved peacefully between planets. They had no weapons and no way to defend themselves against the coming invasion. Jake Morrison knew that the time for stealth attacks was almost over. Soon the Zephyrians would reach the Centauri worlds and begin their assault. When that happened, humanity would have to make a choice between maintaining their secrecy and saving innocent lives.
The Zephyrian invasion fleet reached the outer edge of Centauri space, battered and reduced, but still dangerous. Supreme Commander Veltar had lost nearly 60 ships to the mysterious ghost attacks, but he still commanded over 200 warships. His anger at the losses made him even more determined to complete his mission. The peaceful Centauri worlds hung in space like blue and green jewels, completely unaware of the approaching threat. Their cities sent out radio signals filled with music and poetry and scientific discussions. They had never experienced war and could not imagine that anyone would want to hurt them. Prime Counselor Sil-An was the elected leader of the Centauri people. She was a gentle being with pale green skin and large dark eyes who spent her time studying ancient philosophy. When her scientists detected the approaching alien fleet, she tried to open communications to welcome what she thought were peaceful visitors. Veltar received the Centauri transmission and sneered at their naive greeting. These creatures offered friendship and cultural exchange when they should have been preparing to surrender. Their weakness disgusted him and made the coming conquest seem even easier. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the USS Liberty as the situation reached its critical point. His small force had inflicted significant damage on the Zephyrian fleet, but it was not enough to stop the invasion. In a few hours, the aliens would begin bombarding Centauri cities, and millions of innocent people would die. Amy Taylor intercepted the communications between Veltar and the Centauri leaders. The Zephyrian commander was demanding immediate and unconditional surrender of all Centauri worlds. He gave them 1 hour to comply or face total destruction. The gentle Centauri could not understand why anyone would make such demands. Prime Counselor Sil-An broadcast a desperate plea for peace across all communication frequencies. Her voice was filled with confusion and sorrow as she begged the unknown aliens to explain what they wanted. The Centauri offered to share their art and knowledge and resources if only the invaders would not hurt anyone. Veltar responded to the Centauri player by ordering his ships to destroy several orbital platforms that housed Centauri research stations. The explosions lit up space and sent debris raining down on the planets below. It was a demonstration of power meant to show the Centauri that resistance was hopeless. Lieutenant Kezara watched the destruction with growing unease. She had been reading the ancient texts constantly since the ghost attacks began, and the similarities were too strong to ignore. The old stories described Terrans as protectors of the weak who would appear when innocent people were threatened. Jake Morrison made the most difficult decision of his career as he watched Centauri civilians die. The key Prime Directive forbade contact with alien civilizations, but he could not stand by and watch genocide happen. Humanity had the power to stop this invasion, and that meant they had the responsibility to act. Danny Rodriguez powered down the Liberty's stealth systems, while Amy prepared to broadcast on all frequencies. Lisa Parker positioned the ship directly between the Zephyrian fleet and the largest Centauri world. The USS Liberty appeared on every sensor screen in the system like a ghost becoming solid. Steve Martin and Beth Collins followed Jake's lead by decloaking the Ranger and the Falcon. The three human ships hung in space, facing hundreds of alien vessels in a display of either incredible courage or complete insanity. The crews knew they were probably about to die, but they were ready to fight. Jake opened a communication channel that reached every ship in both fleets. His image appeared on view screens throughout the system, showing a calm human face with steady eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with absolute authority that made everyone listen. The words that Jake Morrison spoke would be remembered across the galaxy for centuries to come. He identified himself as Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Federation and ordered the Zephyrian fleet to withdraw from Centauri space immediately. The reaction to his announcement was electric shock that ran through both alien civilizations. Veltar stared at the human captain in complete disbelief. The being on his screen matched the ancient descriptions perfectly, with pale skin and small eyes and an alien appearance that was both familiar and terrifying. The mythical Terrans were real, and they were here. Kezara frantically checked the old texts against what she was seeing. Every detail matched, from the strange ship design to the way the humans spoke with quiet confidence. The legends had been true all along, and her people had ignored the warnings they contained. The Centauri were equally amazed, but for different reasons. They had never heard of Terrans or humans, but they could see that these mysterious beings were trying to protect them. Prime Counselor Silan sent a grateful message to Captain Morrison, thanking him for his intervention. Veltar recovered from his shock and tried to reassert his authority. He demanded to know who these Terrans thought they were and what right. They had to interfere with Zephyrian military operations. His voice shook with rage and fear as he spoke. Jake Morrison's response was ice-cold and completely without emotion. He told Veltar that humans were protectors of innocent life, and they would not tolerate genocide anywhere in the galaxy. He provided coordinates for a hyperspace jump back to Zephyrian space and gave the alien commander exactly 1 hour to begin his retreat. The human captain explained that his people had been watching the Zephyrian Empire for some time and were not impressed with what they had seen. Slavery and conquest and mass murder were not acceptable behaviors for any spacefaring civilization. It was time for the Zephyrians to learn some limits. Veltar was torn between terror and fury as he listened to the human ultimatum. Part of him wanted to retreat immediately because the ancient texts made it clear that fighting Terrans was extremely dangerous. But his pride and his position as Supreme Commander made it impossible for him to back down. Amy Taylor detected massive energy buildups throughout the Zephyrian fleet as Veltar prepared to attack. The alien commander had decided to fight rather than retreat. He ordered his remaining ships to destroy the 3 human vessels and continue with the invasion of Centauri. Space. Jake Morrison had expected this response and was ready for it. He sent a coded signal to Admiral Kate Sullivan, who had been waiting in hyperspace with a much larger human force. The time for small unit tactics was over, and now it was time for the full might of humanity to reveal itself. The space around the Centauri system suddenly filled with new contacts as Admiral Sullivan's task force emerged from hyperspace. 12 heavy cruisers, led by the flagship USS Constitution, appeared in perfect formation. The human reinforcements had arrived just in time. Veltar looked at his sensors and felt his heart sink. The 3 human ships had become 15 and more were still arriving. His fleet was trapped between the human task force and the planets. They had come to conquer. The easy victory he had planned was about to become a slaughter. Jake Morrison opened communications one final time and spoke directly to every Zephyrian in the invasion fleet. He told them that humanity preferred peace, but was fully prepared for war. The choice was theirs, but they would not be allowed to harm the Centauri people under any circumstances. The galaxy held its breath as 2 vastly different civilizations faced each other across the darkness of space. Ancient myths were about to become deadly reality.
Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the USS Constitution, watching the Zephyrian fleet through her view screen. She was a veteran of 3 interstellar conflicts and had never seen an enemy force so badly positioned for battle. The alien ships were scattered and demoralized while her human task force was fresh and ready for combat. Supreme Commander Veltar stared at the human vessels surrounding his fleet and realized he had made a terrible mistake. The ancient texts had warned about Terran military power, but he had ignored those warnings. Now he faced the consequences of fighting beings who had turned warfare into an art form. Lieutenant Kazara read aloud from the old stories as the 2 fleets prepared for battle. The texts spoke of Terran weapons that could destroy ships in single hits and tactics that made enemies defeat themselves. She begged Veltar to reconsider his decision to fight, but the Supreme Commander's pride would not let him retreat. Captain Jake Morrison coordinated with Admiral Sullivan to position the human ships for maximum effectiveness. The Constitution and her heavy cruisers would engage the main Zephyrian battle line, while the Liberty and her escorts used their stealth capabilities to attack from unexpected angles. The battle began when Veltar ordered his flagship to fire on the Constitution. Bright blue energy beams lanced across space toward the human command ship, but they struck advanced deflector shields that absorbed the impact easily. Admiral Sullivan responded with a single plasma torpedo that punched through the Zephyrian flagship's armor and crippled its main weapons. The difference in technology became apparent immediately. Human ships had been designed by a species that had fought wars for thousands of years, while Zephyrian vessels were built for conquest of weaker opponents. The aliens had never faced an enemy with superior weapons and tactics. Commander Steve Martin brought the USS Ranger through the middle of the Zephyrian formation at incredible speed. His ship's plasma cannons fired continuously as he passed between the alien vessels. Each shot found its target with computer-guided precision and left burning wreckage in his wake. Captain Beth Collins used the Falcon's advanced sensors to identify the Zephyrian command ships and target them specifically. Without proper coordination, the alien fleet began to fall apart as individual captains tried to save their own vessels. The humans had turned an organized military force into a panicked mob. Danny Rodriguez had modified the Liberty's weapon systems to fire quantum torpedoes that could phase through normal matter and explode inside enemy ships. The Zephyrians watched in horror as their vessels were destroyed from within by weapons they could not defend against. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster led squadrons of human fighter craft that danced between the larger ships like deadly insects. The small craft were too fast and maneuverable for Zephyrian weapons to track. They struck at engine sections and weapon arrays with surgical precision. Dr. Helen Carter coordinated electronic warfare from the Constitution's communication center. She used human-computer viruses to invade Zephyrian ship systems and turn their own technology against them. Alien vessels found their weapons firing at friendly ships while their navigation systems sent them crashing into each other. The Centauri people watched the battle from their cities and could hardly believe what they were seeing. The mysterious Terrans fought with a combination of advanced technology and tactical brilliance that was unlike anything in their experience. Every human ship moved with deadly purpose and perfect coordination. Prime Counselor Sil-On broadcast messages of gratitude to the human fleet as they systematically destroyed the invasion force. She could not understand why these beings had risked their lives to protect strangers, but she would never forget their sacrifice. Veltar's flagship shuddered under repeated human attacks as its systems failed one by one. The bridge filled with smoke and sparks while damage reports flooded in from throughout the ship. Half his fleet was already destroyed or disabled, and the rest were in full retreat. Kazara helped wounded crew members while reading the final passages from the ancient texts. The stories ended with warnings about what happened to those who ignored Terran power. Civilizations that fought against them were crushed completely, while those who accepted their protection flourished. Admiral Sullivan's tactical display showed the complete collapse of Zephyrian resistance. In less than 3 hours, the human task force had destroyed or disabled over half of the invasion fleet. The remaining alien ships were fleeing in all directions with human vessels in pursuit. Jake Morrison brought the Liberty alongside Veltar's crippled flagship and opened communications. The Zephyrian commander looked defeated and broken as he stared at the human captain who had destroyed his mighty fleet. His dreams of conquest were over, and his empire would never be the same. The human captain's words were measured and final, as he dictated surrender terms to the beaten alien commander. All Zephyrian forces would withdraw from Centauri space immediately. All conquered worlds would be freed and their populations released from slavery. The Zephyrian Empire would submit to monitoring by human peacekeeping forces. Veltar had no choice but to accept the terms completely. His fleet was destroyed and his people would never again be able to threaten their neighbors. The age of Zephyrian expansion was over and a new era of galactic peace was beginning. The surrender ceremony took place aboard the Constitution with representatives from both fleets present. Veltar formally transferred control of his remaining ships to Admiral Sullivan, while Kazara presented the ancient texts to Dr. Carter as a gift of historical importance. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light as trader. Ships and communication relays carried the story to every inhabited system. The mythical Terrans had returned, and they had proven that the old legends were true. Humanity had revealed itself as the protector of innocent life throughout the stars. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge, looking out at the peaceful Centauri worlds that were now safe from invasion. His crew had performed magnificently and saved millions of lives. But he knew this was just the beginning of humanity's role in galactic affairs. The Centauri established formal diplomatic relations with the Terran Federation and became humanity's first official alien allies. They shared their knowledge of art and philosophy, while humans provided protection and advanced technology. It was the beginning of a partnership that would last for centuries. Other alien civilizations began reaching out to humanity as news of the Centauri rescue spread. Some were former victims of Zephyrian aggression who wanted human protection. Others were peaceful species who hoped to join the growing alliance of free worlds. Admiral Sullivan established a permanent base in Centauri space to coordinate peacekeeping operations throughout the galaxy. The base would serve as a symbol of human commitment to protecting innocent life and maintaining interstellar peace. Jake Morrison received a promotion to Admiral in command of the new Centauri Defense Force. His flagship would be a new vessel, called the USS Protector, that was designed specifically for peacekeeping missions. The ship would carry the message that humanity was watching and ready to act when needed. The ancient Zephyrian texts were studied by human scholars who learned much about early contact between their species. The stories had preserved accurate details about human technology and tactics for hundreds of years. They were both historical documents and warnings about the consequences of evil actions. As the human task force prepared to return to Earth, Jake Morrison thought about how quickly everything had changed. Humanity had emerged from centuries of hiding to take its place as a major galactic power. The myths and legends were real, and the galaxy would never be the same. The stars held new promise now that the forces of conquest and slavery had been broken. Peaceful civilizations could develop without fear, while explorers pushed into unknown regions of space. Humanity had proven that superior technology combined with moral purpose could change the destiny of entire worlds. Captain Morrison's final log entry captured the moment perfectly. Sometimes myths exist to teach important lessons about right and wrong. Today, the galaxy learned why humans should never be forgotten, and why protecting innocent life is worth any sacrifice.